Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to FOL Marketplace. This is the place we discuss business, economics, finance, accounting, and everything in between. We come your way every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And of course, the presenter is Mr. Gabriel Tabito Caro. Gabriel, welcome to the show.
Dennis, thank you for having me. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure doing this every Saturday. So I think today we have a very good topic, and hopefully wherever you are, as we always like to say, please share, come with your comments, uh, bring questions, and maybe if you have perspective, share it with us. We want to learn in as much as we're presenting as well. So wherever you are, take a time for the next hour and a half and join us to talk about today's topic, which is about the exchange rate. If you been following the politics in Liberia or the economy in Liberia, you know we have a current high exchange rate also, and there is also talk of the budget being recast. After what initially supposed to be a very high budget envelope that was presented. So what is causing the budget recast, and also why do we have a high exchange rate? So those are the two things we want to talk about today, and hopefully we can provide some in-depth knowledge and perspective on those two topics. So thank you for joining us and stay tuned as we go through it. Yeah.
We want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. Of course, focus on Liberia Marketplace. This is where you learn everything that is affecting the pocketbook
Yeah.
in Liberia and other places. And so we're glad that you are here. You for spending your Saturday with us. So our topic, as Gabriel said, is the increasing exchange rate
Yeah.
that and budget shortfalls in
Hmm.
Liberia. Budget shortfall is something that we really heard many times. The first time, no, I shouldn't say the first time, but I heard it mainly during the Ellen Johnson presidency, and it continues to now. So, what is it? What is causing it?
Hmm.
And how can we prevent that? We're going to talk about that. But first, let's talk about the exchange rate. And Gabriel, when you say exchange rate, I suppose you mean the U.S. exchange rate, or are there other exchanges or rates in Liberia? Let's
Yeah.
start with that.
So exchange rate is pretty much the you know theoretical definition is the rate, exchange rate referred to the rate at which another currency is exchanged to another, right? To another currency. So in our case, the exchange rate between it will be between the US dollar and predominantly the Liberian dollar. Or, I don't know if we change Canadian dollar, it could be Canadian dollar against the Liberian dollar, it could be the euro against the dollar. But exchange rate is the rate, it just represents the value of the currency relative to another currency. That's pretty much what it is. And
Mm.
yeah, so
And a
that's
lot of
pretty much
us
what.
are familiar with exchange because we exchange US all the time.
Uh-huh.
During the war, when I was in Guinea, there was
Yep.
the Liberian dollar to franc Guinea. If you go to Africa's, the
Hmm.
Liberian dollar to CFA.
Hmm.
When I went to Ghana, I didn't see that. It was mainly US dollar to cities. But along the border, there's a that's big. And
Yep.
I know we're going to go into it more, right? You're going to give us, but as someone who sets this exchange rate, because I remember uh, when in Guinea, right? So
Hmm.
there are market days.
Hmm.
So they will have the Lola market day, the Bosu
Hmm.
market day, the Zor market day. So the
Yeah.
Zor Bosu market day was where I live was Wednesday.
Yeah.
And I think Zor market day comes before the Bosu market day. So whatever was determined in Zor will flow throughout the week.
Yeah.
And these are regular people. So
Yeah.
I don't know how this exchange rate come about. When I went
So
to Ghana now, they have some foreign exchange bureau. So it was
yes.
more organized. But in Guinea, it was done in the market. So tell me how this whole thing comes about.
Yeah, so there is two form of exchange rates, right, in a country. One is fixed and the other is floating. The fixed one, usually you see it in countries such as Liberia, where it's determined by a group of people. Uh, Exchange rate, they usually have a board. to keep it between a certain range. They don't want it to go. Let's say they will say, let's keep it between 150 and 180. And if they see that it's going up to 180 where it might go over 180, they can make adjustment to change it, right? So there's also the floating rate. So from a definition standpoint, pretty much under the exchange rate, the fixed exchange rate system, the value of the currency is pegged to a specific value, right? So let's say, as I said earlier, it could be set to 180, right? Or a basket of good of the currency in value to the currency. Because in our case in Liberia, we don't have this actual measurement of what's considered a basket of goods in Liberia. So in this case, it's set to a specific value, right?
Mm.
And it's set, this is done by the central bank or the monetary, authority, of the country. They can intervene and make intervention in terms of if it's going too high or if it's going too low, right? So that's the exchange. That's the fixed portion of the exchange rate. Now,
Yeah,
also, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, let's keep on that fixed exchange rate because it always confuses me as to how these things are set.
Right.
So if the central bank is setting it, what do they look at?
So they look at the changes between the exchange rate between a dollar. So let's say if $1 right now, I think is about 170 or almost about 180, right?
Yeah.
If it's going too high, right? They can say, hey, this is going too high. We can change it to or make sure that it remains within, let's say, 170, between 170 and 160, right? So there's actual what we call like intervention. So
Mm,
let me explain the other one, the flexible one. The flexible one is based on supply and demand, right?
mm,
It is all based on supply and demand, the amount of goods coming in, the amount of goods coming out. That means nobody can go in to intervene with it. This is what we have in this country. So when you go to like you said, Ghana, that's why you have those bureaus. So it's just there in terms of the demand of the dollar, like the Liberian dollar, or the demand of the US dollar would determine what that exchange rate is from a flexible standpoint, right? So it's all based on market forces. On the fixed one, it is not. It could be like, let's say they could say, Dennis, Gabriel, Larry, you guys should have this body that oversee, that monitors the exchange rate, from a
mm.
fixed standpoint in a country, in the central bank, right? And this is what we have in Liberia. So in an ideal economy, you want to have a floating. When you want to have a market that is determined based on market forces, based basically on demand. Let's say, how can I put this? So the US dollar, the number of transactions that is done in US dollars every day, if you go on the United States, this Federal Reserve Bank of New York, they will show you every day how much demand people are demanding the US dollars, right? That demand would also give you what we call the SOFR rate. The SOFR rate meaning that's the rate at which people are demanding that dollar, that exchange rate.
Okay.
So they will tell you today, it, this amount like 1.33 trillion was traded in US dollar, was demanded in US dollar. Or this week, you will see a certain amount every day. So the rate that you will see it as today will be different from what you see it at yesterday, tomorrow.
Mm,
So it's volatile. So that demand will determine that. But that's because it is floated. You cannot just go say I want 100 million US dollars, you know, I want it at such and such rate. The person will say no. Let me see how much is being traded on the market. That's the rate at which I'm going to give it to you.
So,
Not because I go
yeah, that trader there is a business English. I want you to break it down. So when you say traded, this is why it's
right.
traded, meaning let's say if people are selling things, this is the amount they sold today.
Yes.
Is that what trading is?
Yes. So it's all. So how do I call it? How do I cannot even define this in a layman term. So it's I which. So let's say, okay, perfect example. So let's say you're a market woman, right?
Right,
You want, you buy your goods from outside of Liberia. You don't buy
right,
it from inside Liberia. So in order to go buy the goods from outside Liberia, you would need US dollars,
right,
right? So you have to go, the Liberian dollars you have to go use that money to go buy US dollars in order
right.
to give you US dollar to be able to buy the goods from outside in like
Right.
out of Liberia, right? But you're not the only one doing that, right? There's other market women, thousands of market women doing that
Yes.
that are now that amount of market women doing that, that's what demand. So let's say if a lot of people are now wanting to buy the US dollars, guess what the person selling the US dollar is going to do? They're going to bring up the value.
Correct.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's what that's what we refer to as trade. Now
Right.
let's say
So in
if
the country now, so 1,000 women want to buy US that day. Some
right,
people want 500, some people want 2,000 and all that. So
right,
you put all that together, that's
to
what they are
determine the
demanding. That's what they are.
exactly, right,
That's how
exactly.
much they want, the
Yeah,
US dollar.
exactly. Right. Now, in other cases, it could be lower, right?
Right.
That could be 2,000 women, or let's say 200 women wanting to buy US dollar.
Yeah.
The demand is not there, so you can say so they now have the bargaining power. Hey, that's not a lot of people have it, but in a fixed place where the interest rate are fixed, you go on all road. The person say my exchange rate at a 185 to 1. You can't do anything about that. You'll say, maybe let me go down the street, or maybe leave from that whole community and go somewhere else. Maybe you'll find it cheaper there. That's in a fixed rate environment. In a what we call a floating rate, it is determined. Like you said, when you go in the bureau, you usually you see on the sign it's floating,
Yeah.
like it's going across the sign. This is what it's going to be. You leave from there, you go anywhere else, you will see the same thing. It won't be different from what you saw, at the airport or in Kumasi Market, or on a camp where somebody is trading. It's all the same across the board. That's what floating is. So
Is
nobody can go in and
is one
intervene.
better than the other?
Yes, and maybe that's the next question we should go to.
Okay.
And in a you know in a what we call a market economy, you want your exchange rate to be floated, right? You want it to be floated. You don't want it to be. So let me go to the advantages and disadvantages
Okay, yeah.
uh, of that. So what are the advantages of a floating exchange rate? A floating exchange rate, right? There's what we call market efficiency, right? Because it is determined by what we in economics we call it the invincible hand. The invincible hand is what you and I talked about, where thousands of people demanding US dollars going to set the price of that exchange rate, of what that exchange rate is going to be to, right?
Mm.
We're not going to have an incident where Larry will come out and say, you know what, that is too high for the economy, so you drop it down to a certain level. No, you don't have that. It is all based on the market efficiency. The market determine that. Market meaning
The
the
number of people.
supply and demand. Exactly, the supply and demand forces in the market, right? So it causes what we call the advantage of a floating exchange rate. We call it market efficiency. Floating exchange rate allow currency to adjust freely based on the market conditions, as you and I talked about. It promotes market efficiency, or if you want to say as exchange rate, it also reflects the real supply and demand dynamics of the currency. That's exactly what you and I talk about, right? Because it's of the supply and demand, it will reflect the actual supply and demand of that country currency, right? Another thing, economic stability. Floating exchange rate can help absorb economic shocks, and it promotes stability. If let's say if a country faces some kind of, let's say, economic downturn, or a decline in export, or um, a flexible exchange rate can help restore some competitiveness, right? It can also um, it can restore competitiveness by depreciating the currency value. What do I mean by that? So China does this a lot, right? So China can devalue the currency. When you devalue your currency, what it does, it allow outsiders wanting to come in your country to buy goods to be able to afford the goods. What it also does, it allow people in our country to be able to buy more of your goods, right? So you can create some kind of in a how do you call it? Uh, Value competition
Right.
in your
And
market as
I
well.
always never understood that. So thank you. You brought for bringing that up.
Yeah,
Because the way I understand money is the value should always be high. So when they say China is devaluing the currency, I wonder, I say, but Isn't that bad for China?
No, they do that. They do that from a strategic standpoint. So what it does, it allow more people in the country to afford goods, but it also allow investors coming in to say, hey, I can buy more stuff in China cheaper than I would do outside. So what it does, it create that demand. It bring a lot of people to spend money in your country, and then after that, you can also it we don't in China they don't really have what we call a floating uh uh rate, right? Because they're able to come in and manipulate it and also
Mhm.
allow it to go back to its you know uh self-control, if you want to call it efficiency model. Yeah. So let me go to what we call the disadvantages of floating a floating exchange rate, right? Um, there's volatility. That one you have no control over it, right?
Mhm.
Because it's determined by the market forces. It could be high, it could be low, but all you know, nobody's coming in to intervene, right? It can also bring economic uncertainty. It can cause inflationary problem. This is why central banks, are paid to monitor those markets. And exactly what you and I just talked about, currency manipulation, right? People can manipulate it, like with China, as we mentioned earlier. China does that a lot. Um, so those are the disadvantages of floating your exchange rate. Now, I will say this before maybe we'll go on to the next question. The reason why I'm a big proponent of allowing market forces to determine the exchange rate, and this is why. So in our case, Liberia, which has a fixed exchange rate, if we were to go Nigeria, by the way, I wanted to add this to our topic. Nigeria just floated the exchange rate.
Mm.
When Tinubu took power, that was one of the first thing he did. You know why he did that?
No.
Because it allowed investors to determine to come in and have control over their money. So what do I mean by that? So let's say you, Danish, you have 200 million. You say I want to go in Liberia to invest, but Liberia has
Make that 300 million because I'm yeah.
okay. So let's say, Dennis, you have 300 million. You want to go to Liberia to invest, right? But in our case, we have a fixed exchange rate, right? You know what? You know the advantages that disadvantages that does. Anytime Joe Blow from central bank can go in and manipulate the currency, and the $300, 300 million you put into Liberia could be less than that,
You're worth
right?
100
Exactly,
million.
it could be worth less. You don't have control over that, right? So because our exchange rate is not floated, it scares off a lot of people. If investors like yourself wanted to go into Liberia with that quantum of money, the one thing you want to have control over is the value of your money, and being able to say, okay, I'm bringing 300 million into Liberia, but at least I have, because the market is floated by market forces, the control you have as an investor, you can what we call, you can hedge it. Hedge it meaning that your exposure to the Liberian currency, you can bet against that, right? You can bet it's only cost, let's say for 300 million, it will probably cost you maybe $5 million to hedge it. But what it does, it give you that peace of mind. You don't have to worry about the Liberian economy, the exchange rate going up and down, or anything that happened to it, because you hedge yourself and protect it, right? You can do that at the exposure of the Liberian dollar. You can also do that to the exposure of the US dollar as well. Even with the interest rate, you can hedge your bet against the interest rate. So that way it gives you peace of mind, and for you to now say, this $300 million, I have it. Let me focus on the other thing. I have corruption to worry about. I have, trying to figure out other things in the market in Liberia. I should not be worrying about whether my money is going to be 300 million or is going to drop this to 250 million. That peace of mind is the reason why Tinubu saw that it was very important to float the exchange rate in Liberia, in Nigeria. And I think from hopefully the next administration that comes in is able to do something like that, because it will bring people into Liberia to invest in our country, where they have this safe, control over their money to be able to invest in our country. So that's the reason why I'm a big proponent of it. And that's what I believe Nigeria actually did that as well. I just wanted to throw that in. Yeah.
No, that's very important, and that to hedge it, maybe you got to explain a little bit more. But Has there been a time in Liberia where we had a floating exchange rate? Do you know?
I don't think, and I have dug into the financial history of Liberia. There's never been a time where we had floating exchange rate. At one point, I know the Liberian dollar was pegged against the US dollar at 1 to 1. I think that was in the 60s when we had 8 years as the second
Yeah.
highest growing economy in the world. At that time, where the my old man I can call normal day, right? At that
Mm.
time, it was 1 to 1. But in terms of it being floated, I don't recall. And somebody, if you guys are watching here, please keep us honest and maybe we can. That's something we can look into as well. But from what I've researched so far, I've not found that. So
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
So now let's come to Liberia and see why is it that our rate keep going up?
Mhm.
Who is controlling that?
So that is at the central bank level. That is at the central bank level. The central bank has I think they have an interest rate regime. They also have an exchange rate regime as well that set those exchange rate and interest rate. Um, that is done at the central bank level from their monetary policy standpoint. Yeah.
And what are they looking at to do that? You know,
What
yeah,
do
yeah.
you
What they consider? Let's say, hey, central bank wants to set the rate at this level.
right?
What is driving that decision? I want you to enter their brain.
Okay, so from that standpoint is done by trade, the amount of trade that comes in again in the
Mhm.
country in and out of the country. It can determine if there's trade imbalances, could determine whether the lower the exchange rate or they increase the the exchange rate. It's all based on the trade in terms of the number of trade that comes in, the goods that come in the country, or the number of one that we export out of the country. That is the the most driving force behind their control of the interest rate. You know,
And I
that's
don't
yeah.
know to what extent you study it, whether they have been making that decision consistent with that, with the trading rate.
What do you in terms of?
Right. Let's say based on the trading rate, they set
Mhm.
it at this. Is that the right decision to make at that point?
Again, and this is why I say I'm not a big proponent of doing that because whether let's say you're having less trade in a country and you decide to lower the exchange rate to have a lot coming in, right? To have a lot of consumption within the country, it put other people at disadvantages, and we went over this, right? It put them as a disadvantages, right? So let's say you know that the exchange rate was at 150, right? Exchange
Right.
rate, $1 to uh 150 Liberian dollar. You as a business owner, you will budget for that. You know this is what the exchange rate is going to be. Now
Right.
all of a sudden, maybe the minister of finance, not the minister of finance, but somebody at the central bank said realize that we having trade imbalances, right? So we got to you know we want to export more goods, or maybe bring in more goods in the country, and they decide to maybe lift it up to 150, 160, right? It put you as a disadvantages, at a disadvantage, meaning that you would now have to spend an additional $10. The
Mm.
$150 you budgeted for, you now have to add additional $10 to bring it to 160 in order to afford the same US dollar that you wanted to buy, right? So whether and this is why I believe that it is not, you know, whether you're looking at it from a trade, you think you're doing this to stimulate growth. I don't believe anybody, one group of people should be having this level of control over
Right.
uh, what that rate should be. It should be determined at market forces. If you want your economy to grow beyond the state that is in right now, if you want, we always talk about foreign direct investors to come in. If you want to bring people there uh, to invest in our country, allow them to have that peace of mind to come in. Let the market forces determine that, and don't uh, you know interfere with what we call with the market forces. Yeah.
Because politics can set in too, right?
It does. And a perfect example here, like what is happening with inflation now, right?
Right.
Biden can come out and say, oh, inflation is too high. We need to, do such and such, or the job creation. He could say, oh, I don't want the central bank governor to, Federal Reserve to increase interest. I mean, uh, what do you call it? The interest rate, right? Because it's going to cause a lot of employer to not hire a lot of people, and we need the economy to grow. Well, that is not his job. This is why the central bank and the government itself need to be separate entity, because you don't want politics to interfere with what they're doing from a long-term standpoint just because you're trying to get political gain and you're worried about your election next year. No, that's not how it's supposed to be done. And this is why we're having um, this is why I believe maybe that's the reason why they actually fixed that. Because if they, let's say right now we're at 180, I think at 180. If coming to the election cycle, we have 3 more months left to go. We know it is too high. It could drop maybe in the next 2 months, and take my word for it, it could drop to maybe 160, and the president could come out and start making making speech about that. Hey, we lowered the exchange rate. It's not as high as it used to be anymore, and that could help him gain political point. But for me, I think that should be done from the market standpoint. It should not have no Joe Blow at central bank interfering just because you feel um, that is what is right for the country. Yeah.
My next question will be about the relationship between exchange rate, interest rate, and inflation. But before we come to that, I want to
Hmm.
ask about, because you just talk about that, because there can be politics into it. So
Yeah.
during the elections, Sierra Leone, I think our government made a, surrogates of the government say, hey, look at Sierra Leone.
Right.
U.S. rate in Liberia is lower than what is in Sierra Leone, and you guys are complaining, right?
Right.
So U.S. rate being lower in Sierra Leone and higher in Liberia, what does that tell us? Does that mean the economy in Liberia is better than that in Sierra Leone, or is it because people are manipulating it?
So you said, who said the interest rate, the U.S. rate is higher in Sierra Leone?
That was the surrogates from the president. That's the government. That's what they were saying.
No, I think every 70. I'm
No,
not
not
sure if
interest rate, the exchange rate.
the exchange rate. I don't think is it's. I'm not sure if Sierra Leone is on a floated or fixed exchange rate. But I think i- if they're trying to, and they always like to do this. Hopefully, I answer your question right. They always like to do this to compare us to Sierra Leone, because Sierra Leone almost have an economy that is almost similar to ours. Um,
Right.
Sierra Leone has a
I just googled and say one US dollar is to 19,670 leons.
yeah. So that was two. Okay, so in 2021, and this will give us a good reference point. 2021, I was in no 2022. I went to Sierra Leone from car where I drove all the way to Freetown, right? The exchange rate at Bo Wadasa, between the Liberia and Sierra Leone border, was 1,200 Leon to $1. So if it has gone up to 119, there's a huge spike in there. That
Yeah,
is called
19,670.
right. 119,270. That is a huge spike in since what is it, 2020, over a year period. That is a huge spike in there. And I think because it's what is happening with maybe inflation in Sierra Leone that is causing that to happen. And again, that's why that exchange rate actually went up. Um, um, so I don't know why people make the comparison when you know
R-
it were not the same
But,
dollar if they were right. You're
but
saying something.
is that good? And let me, I don't want to go the political route, but
Right.
that's the say, because the argument they were making is, hey, the elections here will not be, or the economy is not going to affect the elections, because look, the U.S. rate in Liberia is far less than the U.S. rate in Sierra Leone, yet the incumbent won. So the economy in Liberia is even better. We are doing better than Sierra Leone. So would the exchange rate give us that right picture
No,
of
I don't think
the
I don't
economy?
think it's a I don't think the exchange rate is a good indicator to determining whether the economy is doing very well, because, as I said, anybody can manipulate the currency
Mm.
to control their narrative, right? If you're on a fixed exchange rate, you can manipulate the currency to you want to look at what we call the purchasing power parity, meaning how much does, let's say if one Liberian dollar was trading at 150, I mean, $1 was trading to 150 Liberian dollar. You want to measure how much 150 Liberian dollar can buy
Right.
you in Liberia, then what 100, 1,900 Sierra Leone dollar can buy you in Sierra Leone. Well, if you have that basket of goods, and one basket of goods has more stuff in it compared to those exchange rate, then you can make an actual suggestion, or recommendation, or even comment that, hey, Sierra Leone economy is better than Liberia, because with one Sierra Leone dollar, which, I mean, one US dollar, which equates to 1,900 leons, right, can buy more goods in Sierra Leone than that same amount, if you exchange that same US dollars
Yeah.
in Liberia, can buy you in Liberia. In that case, then you can make that actual comparison. But if not, you cannot. That's a loose statement, and I think people should be questioning, from this perspective, should be questioning that kind of assumption being made by those political people out there. Yeah.
I like this, and I hope people are enjoying it the way I'm doing that. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is FOL Marketplace. We are discussing the increasing exchange rate in Liberia. What is the so if people will manipulate that, let's say you bring it down, bring it up, take it
Mhm.
anywhere for political reason, what would the impact be? Positive, negative?
So I think we talked about this, right? So let's maybe go in depth about it, right? So and I think the the best way to describe it is that, um, if you know if, let's say, if you were in charge of that, right, and you know that your when your currency is devalued, more people buy stuff in your country, which can give you a lot of money in the country, and that will help the government, right? You will reduce the exchange rate, right? Because not just Liberian people are buying stuff, but foreigners are also doing that as well. But
Yeah,
if you increase it, right, it puts you at a
yeah,
disadvantage. You will not do that. But I think the best way is the way I explain it.
yeah.
And
Let the market
our
do.
right, our assumption, the way we look at this, it should be how much does currently. So the perfect example, we have an exchange rate of 1 to 180 right now. I think it's about that. How much does that 180 Liberian dollar can buy you in Liberia right now,
Yeah,
for the average person living in any part of Liberia? How much goods can they buy, right? Compared to, maybe 3, 4, 5 months ago, right, where the exchange rate was probably 160. How much stuff could they have bought then with that 160, right?
yeah,
And if your people are not benefiting from that exchange rate, it makes sense for you to, if it's too high, and they, even though they think they have enough money and they're not buying enough with it, then it makes sense for you to manipulate it. But
mm.
I think your first objective, hopefully I'm making sense here, your
Yeah,
first objective should be to the citizens in your country. How well are they fair enough, right? And that will help you determine. In as much that I'm a big proponent of floating exchange rate, I think if I were in a regime where I have this fixed uh, exchange rate, that's the first thing. That's the only thing I'll be looking at. How can I use this to make sure that people in this country are benefiting from it, right?
yeah,
As opposed to us now trying to compare ourselves to Sierra Leone. Food. Let me say this specifically. Food, hotels, things in Sierra Leone are a lot cheaper than they are in Liberia. Hotel, the same hotel, five. I don't think Grand Royal is a five-star hotel. Radisson Blue in hotel in Sierra Leone, which is a five-star hotel, was costing I think $60 a night. Whereas the same one in Liberia, I think is a 125, 150 a night. This like the difference is huge. So in as much as we think that who made that statement that Liberia is better off than Sierra Leone is a false argument. You have to go in Sierra Leone and experience the price difference there before
Right.
you can make that a comparison. If you don't even want to go to Freetown, go to Bow Waterside, which is probably 2 hours drive from right in Central Moravia. Yeah.
Right. So the question that was pending is the relationship between the exchange rate, the interest rate, and inflation.
Mhm. Okay, so the exchange rate, the relationship between between inflation and exchange rate. So I think I talked about the purchasing power parity, right?
Right.
Meaning, if one country has higher inflation than the other, its currency value should depreciate to maintain parity in purchasing power of goods, right? Meaning, uh, if your inflation is too high, you want to depreciate your currency so you can have, purchasing power of the goods in the country. This means that a country with high inflation should have a relatively weaker exchange rate, right?
Yeah.
Again, I would say this: this means that a country with higher inflation should have a relatively weaker exchange rate,
You mean
right?
lower?
Yeah, so this means that a country that has high inflation, if your inflation is high, you want to have lower exchange rate,
Okay.
right? In our case, what do we have right now? We said we have high, well, in our case, it makes sense. We have low inflation as a central bank, the Minister of Finance said. So our exchange rate is high. So that means because it's high, it allow money to leave out of the country because you will spend more, right? When you go buy something because of the 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 connection there. That's one what do I want to call it? Relationship there. So another one could be inefficient revenue. One of the primary causes of no, let me go here. So, so that's differentiator. What we call differentiator, right? What do I mean by that? So, in the short run, inflation differentiation mean that the country can can influence the exchange rate, right? In a country, if a country experiences higher inflation, then its trading partners. That means, as I said earlier, the people that come in to trade, whether outside or inside, right? The goods become relatively uh, more expensive. Hopefully I'm making sense here. I'm
Yeah.
not just right. Hopefully I'm making sense here, right? Which can lead to decline in exports. So if your goods are expensive, it people don't buy a lot, right? There's you're exporting less, right? And it can also increase import into the country, right? Um, I think that's the from a what we call relationship standpoint. That's the two. Those are the two bigger relationship between the two. Uh,
How about exchange rate? I mean,
actu-
interest rate and exchange rate.
how can I put this? Interest rate and exchange rate. So your interest rate is determined. It's pretty much the cost that you pay for to borrow,
Right.
right? Right. So if your interest rate is too high, you'll have less people borrowing, right? And if you have less people borrowing from in your economy, right, that means they don't have enough money, from
Yeah.
a standpoint to be able
So
to
it
go
really
buy.
doesn't have much direct relationship.
In a way, it does because if I like to use the market woman analogy. So let's say or not market woman, the average business person in Liberia. Let's say you have a store that imports TVs into Liberia
Right.
specifically,
Or,
right?
or,
And
or solar panel.
or solar panel, right? And you buy these things from China, right? But you need what we call maybe a line of credit, which is from a business standpoint, that's like a business credit card, right?
Right.
Where you have $1 million line of credit. You can buy 500,000 worth of solar panel from that line of credit, and go and bring them to Liberia. But you want to borrow against that because that line of credit is determined by the current interest rate. Maybe you not want to do that because it's too expensive to borrow, right? And
Right.
because and because of that, you will not have enough, goods in the country to 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 sell to your customer. So yeah, in a way, you're right. In a way, there's not a direct relationship between these two. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Well, and that's unless you have anything else to talk about, we can go to budget shortfalls, my favorite.
Actually, yeah. Let's just jump into the
Right.
budget shuffle. I think that was the second topic on here.
Right. So if you are just joining us, this is FOL Marketplace, the place we discuss business, finance, economics, and everything in between.
Mhm.
I'm your host, Dennis Jai, and of course, Gabriel is the subject matter expert here and the presenter. Budget shortfalls. I heard it a lot of time from my good friend, Mr. Amara Kone, the
Mhm.
former finance minister.
Mhm.
What is budget shortfalls and what causes it?
So, um, eh, budget shortfall can be caused by many factors.
What
It
is
could
it in the
be
first place?
so budget shortfall means that you projected you're going to make 100 million. Let's say you went into as a to use you as an example, you took 300 million into Liberia, you invested 100 million in a company, and you say, you know what, in the first 5 years or in this year, we're going to make maybe uh maybe we're going to make 10 million, right,
Right,
out of that 100 million that we invested. And that's projection based on the demand of your goods that you're providing to the Liberian economy. So you say, if I sell this amount of products or
right,
goods, I'm going to make 10 million within this year. But now, let's say going on to the eighth month or the 10th or the 11th, you realize that the expectation, the projection that you made in terms of the quantity that's supposed to be bought in order for you to realize that 100 million, you're not selling those. You're not selling monthly basis in order to reach that level, right? So there
right,
could be many factors. You could say, oh, people are not buying, the economy is too high, so there's not demand, that's too much demand going in this period. So you'll say, hey, maybe we're not going to make that 10 million, right? In that case, in your case, you will reach out to your CFO, right? Your CFO, you won't even have to reach out to them. They will tell you, say, hey, as Mr. CEO, we will not be able to reach that 10 million projection that we made because of these factors, because of the factors that I want to talk about, right? It
mm,
could be, as I say, inefficient revenue, meaning, uh, again, you're not selling.
right,
In the case from a country standpoint, it could be low tax collection,
right,
ineffective tax administration, tax evasion, which I think we have a lot in Liberia, where there are businesses that exist that don't pay their taxes, or let's say there's tax cuts,
mhm,
that reduce the revenue that the government is supposed to get, or in other cases, it could be economic downturn. During an economic downturn or a recession, uh, it could cause decline in the price of commodity, which is part of our uh, royalties we get from
mhm,
these concessions that we sign. So if there's
right,
economic downturn, whether it's uh, low demand for iron ore, low demand for gold or diamonds, it could impact how much you get allocated for the budget. Or in another case, Dennis, it could be excessive spending. You could
right,
say, I'm going to make 10 million, but you have already spent on your associate, on your research and development. You've already spent 9 million, and you're only 5 months in, and by the time you get to the 10th month or 11th month, you're already over budget. So it could be because of that.
right.
Um, and my
Okay.
last one, it could be
Mhm,
because of the cost to service your debt. Let's say you have debt that you took out, and the cost on that to service that debt could be too
so,
high. Yeah,
and
exactly.
and and not with no finance background, I can add even two more.
Yeah, go ahead. There you
Just
go.
bad projection because you don't know what you're doing. Okay.
I think that's probably the best one.
And then number two could
Uh-huh.
be that you were just doing this for impression.
Ah, there
So
you go.
let me so for a budget, we have
Uh-huh.
two things going on here, right? Let's say we
Right.
have 700 million that we
Hmm.
say we're going to spend as our expenses, right? We're going to spend 700 million on a lot of things,
Right.
pay or salary, goods and services, etc. And
Uh-huh.
then our revenue side, we say we will raise 900 million.
Uh-huh.
Where is the budget shortfall there? Is it when we don't get the revenue, or if we don't spend how much we want to spend, or if we
Okay.
spend more than we anticipated?
Okay. So a budget shortfall meaning that you projected, right? Budget, and this is why people that get excited when the budget is announced, I think are just people who don't understand where a budget is supposed to be, right? A budget is just an estimate, right? You can estimate, say I'm going to, based on, maybe you can do it from the year before. You can look at 3 years trend and say, based on this trend, our budget has been increasing by, let's say, 5%. And so from this last year budget, I'm going to increase it to such as another 5%. So it will be higher. So you can say I'm going to project that this year we're going to collect that amount.
Right.
Now,
So
that is
hold on. Let's take it step by step.
right,
So this budget here, this whole name we call budget.
right.
What is it that we are looking for? Is it a revenue we're looking at?
That is specifically the revenues.
Okay.
Exactly your tax revenue, your you know, royalties. In our case, in our budget, we
Mhm.
get grants from international
Yeah.
partners. In some cases, we have even borrowing, right? We borrow, right? So your tax, your borrowing, your grants, all of those things makes up your revenue and
So,
gives you
so,
this
so this
revenue.
year when they say, oh, the budget here is 700 million,
Right.
or if Mr. Cummings say, I'm going to increase the budget to 1 billion,
Hmm.
that 1 billion or that 700 million, which number is that? Is it revenue? Is it expense or both?
Revenue is the budget is just it's just
Revenue.
revenues,
Right.
revenues and expenses. So if you look at the budget, it has two things. If you say I'm going to project 1 billion dollar, this is how much I'm going to collect in
Collect.
revenues, right?
Okay.
Collect in revenues specifically.
All
Now,
right.
for an entire budget, in that budget, you also have the things that you're going, what we call expenditure. You're going to spend
We're going to spend.
$1 billion on as well, right?
Right. So that $1 billion you expect to receive. That's your budget. That's the budget
Exactly.
number that.
That's that's the key word.
Yeah.
Expect.
You're right.
Yeah.
So now this budget here, I'm going to get 1 billion,
Hmm.
but then you say I'm going to spend 700 million.
Right.
But then when it starts, you start spending. In my
Hmm.
village, they call it eating crazy, and they call it disasa. So when you get disasa now, then you start
Yeah.
spending more. You get so
Exactly.
excited.
Right.
So instead of 700 million, you
Right.
have spent 900 million in the first 6 months.
Right. Right.
Then boom, budget shortfall because you are falling short
Yep.
of what you. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's go specifically to Liberia.
Right.
We have seen budgets. How often do we see this budget shortfall, and what is specifically causing it in our case, not just a generalized example?
So,
How have we
in,
been able to fix it?
in Liberia, in our case, I think one of the things you mentioned is uh, one, either we don't have a good understanding of the tax, the grants, and the borrowing that we do to fund our expenses that we have, the recurring expenses. That mean we just say, so when you come out, because you are the minister of finance now, when you come out, you just throw any number out to get people excited. One is lack of understanding of where your expenses are, and the other one is lack of understanding of your actual, like, guarantee. Like, if you don't do anything, you don't like do any adjustment to your policies, your tax policy, your revenue things, you don't have a, like, guarantee. You don't know how much money your guarantee you're going to get, right? Now, if you knew that, you will be able to project an accurate or close to an
Yeah.
accurate without with just maybe small variance that wouldn't even matter of a budget every time you do your budget because you have a good understanding of how much money you'll collect from your taxes, your borrowing, how much you'll borrow from your international partner, how much you will get, right? Because you have a good understanding of even let's just say if I don't do anything at all, this is how much I'm guaranteed to going to get.
Yeah.
Now, in another case, it could be you could come out and say, okay, I collected 10 million this year. I want to collect 15 million. So what I'm going to do, instead of having a 15% tax rate, I'm going to drop the tax rate down to 13 or 10%. That way, it will encourage a lot of investors to invest in the
Yeah.
country. So from that additional investment, I believe from that I will get additional money. Even though I lower my tax rate, it will the investment activity from other foreign direct will help me now to grow this revenue to either 15 million or in our case to $1 billion. So you
Mhm.
can do adjustment. You can from a tax policy standpoint, you can do certain things to entice people to
Right.
invest or to shift things around to cause people to get more money. Another thing that you can do that could
Before you
help,
get to that, and
right?
Admiral Sharif mentioned, because it's not just the revenue, it's also grant and loan, as you
Yeah.
stated.
Yep.
But I want to ask
Exactly.
on the loan portion.
Right.
I mean, loan is something that you're going to pay back. So you
Right.
you you actually calculate loan in what you expect to receive,
Yeah. Yeah.
or when you are calculating that, do you because you have to pay and with interest too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So loan is part of your, how do you call it, your revenue. So because you collect because you borrow money, that's money that you now have to spend
right,
on things, right? You can go and borrow 1 million. That's 1 million you have come in as a, you can count it as revenue even though you're going to pay it back. However, as you mentioned, there's interest rate on that, right? You have to
yeah,
look at the cost at which you borrow it, right? So that's, sometimes can throw people off. So let's say you could
right,
borrow money for, let's say, 1 million, 12%. Eventually, if they give it to you to say, Dennis, because we know you, you've been a great country, so we're gonna give you 3 years to just pay interest only. After that, you're gonna start paying interest and principal. So you could leverage that time, but after that 3 years, you now have a higher debt service that's going to be that's going to eat into your budget. And if you're not very knowledgeable about that, you will not allocate the amount of expenses for that, in
mm.
your next budget, and that could be a surprise cost to
Oh,
you, right?
so now I see where politics comes in, because I have 6 years to be president,
Hmm.
so I can take all that loan and kick the can down the road.
Thank you. Yep. Yeah. You can literally do that. You can literally take or borrow money, a huge quantum of money, and say, you know what? Let's structure it. If you have a very good negotiating power, you say, let's structure it. I want to invest this money in various key infrastructure. But right now, those infrastructure, if I do invest in it right now, they won't pay off until the next 5 years. So allow me to be paid on this loan, just the interest on it. Then after 5 years or after 6 years, I will start paying principal and interest. But guess what? After that 6 years, there's a high chance you probably won't be in office anymore. You
Yeah,
don't have anything to do with it. That's your predecessor's um, problem
that you got to worry about. And when you go in,
to deal with.
you even take the floor mat, the rug. Yeah.
Exactly. So yes, loan, it is part of revenue, and as Amara Seri rightly pointed out, it is part of revenue. So
Right.
yeah.
So wow. So now someone can say, well, I'm going to take the revenue up to 900 million.
Hmm.
And out of that 900 million, maybe 600 million is all loan. So
It could
this
be.
is all fluff.
It could be. Right. It could be. But I mean, even though from a logical standpoint, it won't make sense, but it could be. Right. In our case, we have 110 million dollar in this current budget, the 2023 budget, 110 million dollar of external sources that is coming from part of the borrowing cost that part of borrowing that we talked about. So yeah, you can do that, but at the end of the day, the you're going to have to pay back that
I mean,
money.
but that's my second term. I don't have to come back. So
Exactly. That's what I'm
so I,
saying.
so I take that and I use that to say, hey, you see, we increased the budget to 900 million. We took it from 300 million, now it's 900 million. I mean, we're good. This guy is a genius, right?
And this is why you need financially sound legislatures in the House of Representatives and House of Senate. People who will question the logic of what you're doing, even if you were the president, right? To say, hey, Dennis said we should borrow such and such amount, but the House of Senate should be questioning you. Does that even make sense from a financial standpoint? Are we even will we when once the principals is due begin to due on these loans, will we be in a position to be able to finance it from our budget, right? And those are the decisions they should be making long term. Not it makes sense just because we're paying interest only on it and we were able to absorb it. Eventually, the principal on that will be due, and from a budgetary standpoint allocation, you got to service your debt. At that point, will you be collecting enough revenue to be able to service this quantum of debt that you actually have as part of your budget? So that should be the thing that people in the House of Representatives, the Senate, and those what we call our lawmakers should be thinking about. Not what makes sense right now, but what makes sense 3, 4, 5, even 20 years from now. Yeah.
And let me put a little bit of politics in it,
Right.
right? Because I want to get an understanding of what's going on currently. So
Yep.
with everything that you are explaining,
Hmm.
right? Is this something that we hear on the political campaign? Are people talking about these things? To say this is what I'm going to do, really, with the budget in it specifically, or is it not time yet?
Dennis,
Because
and
it looks like we are not evaluating presidential candidate based on some of these factors. It's just like who is from our ethnic group, our county, our political party, or who we think we're going to benefit from. How are
yeah,
these things actually discussed on the campaign trail?
yeah, Dennis, that is another great question, and I think and I think that's something we always say on this show that business, economics, and finance affects everything you do. And you should be questioning everything these people do on the campaign trail. If I were a presidential candidate, that is something that would have been part of my constant talking point right now, especially the debt, you know, especially the budget shortfall that is coming up again. That tells you that without being too political, this administration has a very bad way of assessing budget that they don't understand that every year you're going to have to budget recast. Now, budget is not going to be 100%. No, nobody is ever going to tell you your budget is going to be 100%. No, it's not going to be. But the variance, the meaning the change in which that it is so significant that you have to recast it to say this is significant enough to recast it, that tells you that you don't have a good understanding of what you're projecting
Mm.
and uh what you're making, what you're going to make. That's one. The other thing is, I think if anybody was on this campaign that they should be talking about is the quantum of debt that we have. I like to refer people to the Ministry of Finance website. We have a debt report that comes out, I think, every quarter. It is usually between 30 and 35 pages. Go take a look at that report, and if you take a look at it when you're done reading it with a good understanding, you will chew up the current ruling party like a bubble gum and spit them out because of what is in there. Like if you go read that report, it's about 35 to 35 pages long. Go read that, and from a opposition standpoint, if you understand what they mean, you will chew out this ruling party like a bubble gum and spit them out. What do I say that? Our debt right now is about $1.2 billion.
Mm.
If you know that our GDP is about 3 billion, the entire GDP, meaning that the goods and services that is produced in a 12-year period within our country, it is 3.5 billion. However, we for every dollar in GDP we produce in our country, that means in the 12-month period, we owe 50 cents. Again, let me say that for every dollar we make in a GDP in our country, we owe 50 cents. I mean 51 cents. That means we only have 49 cents to make to do what we need to do with it.
Mm.
Now, from a numerical standpoint, because we like to compare ourselves to our neighbors. You look at Ghana, Ivory Coast, and always Sierra Leone. You might say those people have a GD debt to GDP that is 80, or some are approaching 100%. But there is production going on in our country. There's a lot of productivity going on in our country that can make up for that. One, another thing, those countries have, at least Ghana and Ivory Coast have what we call credit rating, sovereign credit rating. So they can go back to the global market or the IMF and the World Bank and raise capital, enough money. Ghana got 3 billion, Ivory Coast got 3.5, and restructure their debt to make sure they continue to invest. In our case, we don't have that leverage, right? So this is why, in as much that it is only 51% debt to GDP, it should be concerning to you because we're at a higher disadvantage than our counterparts in the region. But if I were on the campaign trail, those are the talking point that I would be making and how important that is. Because if you don't have that money to invest, I cannot go invest in any counties, in other things that are like infrastructure that's supposed to benefit those counties, to these people that who votes that I'm trying to buy. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for me to say that I'm going to represent you when the things that I need, the vote that I'm asking for, and what I want to do, I'm not able to do it because of the constraint that the country is currently having. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
You put a lot of things out there, and I want to
yeah.
take them little by little.
Hmm.
But before I say that, if you want to join the conversation, please call the number that's on the screen, 605-313-6004. The code is 791-403 #. See, I don't have business, economic, or finance background, but I'm able to understand this and understand it very good because Gabriel is doing very well. So if you are here, you have questions, please ask. Or you also, that's your background, contribute, say something. And if we're doing a good job, and I said to somebody, we are so accustomed to watching these shows only with a critical eye. If you watch the show, you say, okay, is that person this, so that you can attack. But the reason for calling should not always be to criticize or to attack. You can call and just clap your hands and clap for me, or clap for Gabriel, or clap for us. So that's another way of doing it. So if you don't have a question, you have a comment, or you just want to say thank you, please do that. Gabriel, so we talk about budget shortfall and use the word recast.
Yeah,
So now we have a budget shortfall. And one of the things that I think that is done is to recast, right?
right, right.
Meaning you are redoing the budget. So
Thank
you
you.
projected to make 1 billion, and by the time we get to the 6 month, remember this is the
Mm,
eating craziness, you get this is so you spend so much, so you
yeah.
have to go back now and recast
Hmm.
to throw a little bit light on that. So right now you are saying, okay, we passed what we're supposed to do,
Hmm.
but you are not getting new money. So what is this recasting, and how does that help?
So in our case where we're not getting any new money, right? We can we, the recasting will have us shifting a lot of priorities
Uh,
to, yes. So we have, so
like harmonization.
that's somebody should coin that word in Liberia, in the Liberian political body, because I think I've heard it enough, and I think I know. Um, um, I've heard that word enough, and that's exactly what it means. You're gonna harmonize, right? To me, you you have to shift priority around. So what do I mean by that? Let me, on a serious note. So let's say you allocated 10 million for the healthcare sector, right? The
Mhm.
health infrastructure. Um, because of, you realize that we're not getting, we're not going to meet the budget that we allocated for in the fiscal year. You say maybe let's allocate maybe 9 million there instead of the 10 million, and
Mhm.
then we take that 1 million and bring it somewhere else. So let's say you could say, like, literally, we can even go to the office of the vice president, and cut from there. You can cut on things that you realize are not priority, to
Right,
shift that excess money into other things that you wanted to invest in, because the money that you thought you were going to get in, for which you allocated these
right.
quantum of set amount of money, it's not going to be that amount anymore. So you have to make adjustment to your priorities to be able to 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 continue with your your priorities that you set out in the budget, right? So
And it will
certain
be
things are gonna get right.
it
Go
will
ahead.
be a good if you say, okay, since we're not able to get it, let's at least cut the gas slip. Or instead of giving 1 million to the speaker,
Hmm.
let's reduce that.
Yep.
But those are not the kind of cuts that we make.
Yeah.
The cuts we make are something that's supposed to go against sexual gender based violence,
Hmm.
to stop it, or something like to have more trained teachers in the
Yeah.
public school. Because of late I've been seeing retirement teachers in my hometown that are like 50 years old. They say you got to retire.
Yeah.
That's another story. The next thing, yeah. So that was what I wanted to say about the recast. The
Hmm.
next thing you mentioned is the debt.
Yeah.
And GDP is, I wrote here, GDP is 3 billion.
Hmm.
Uh, debt is 1.2 billion. So
Hmm.
if you do that math, that's what they call a debt to GDP ratio.
Yep.
Okay. Now, some may argue, say, well, what's about the US? Their debt, I mean, is through the roof.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes debt, as I learned, can be good.
It is. That is that good. There's always there's good debt, right? There's good debt. Good debt meaning that you can borrow 1 million at 3% and invest in it. Let's say you borrow 1 million at 3% and you go and buy yeah, I like to use Texas because the houses in Texas are cheaper. You buy two multifamily property at 500,000, 500,000 each. After that, the mortgage payment on each property, let's say you're making an additional 2 grand every year extra after you pay your mortgage on each. So you're making an additional 4 grand every year. Pocket cash flow that after you pay your mortgage that's left over. That is good debt because you put that money to use. One, that additional those properties that you buy could go up in value. Now, that's from the U.S. standpoint. People might say, "Hey, we're talking about Liberia. Let's use it in a Liberia context."
Mm.
So let me put it in a Liberia context.
But
So
that
let's say
US content make me to understand it better.
right. But you're not the only person. There's a lot of people maybe from
Yeah.
Liberia watching it, right?
Hmm.
So let's say you, in our case, we go to because the IMF and the US, I mean, and the World Bank are the only options we have right now. So let's say we go to the IMF, we borrow uh 30 million, right? And we take that 30 million and we say we want to connect Lofa, we want to connect Bong to Monrovia, we want to
Yeah,
connect
the
Lofa.
Banga Monokona Highway.
Yes, right. Now, from let's say we borrow that at 3%, right? The reason why I think it's a good debt because those places are bread basket. It will give people direct access to bring their goods to Morovia or vice versa. Or it can now take some people that wanted to live in Moravia and say, I don't want to live in Moravia anymore. There's a direct access road from here to Lofa or Banga. I can go build a
Yeah.
house there and live there and have easy access to Moravia, right?
Mm.
So in a long term, it gives you what we call it allows intertrade within the country to be easier. People can free flow their goods from different part of the counties to
Right.
Moravia, vice versa, right? So that's a long-term investment. If you want, while building that too, you can put a toll on there, right? Or to make up for that, you can say, you know, for every gallon of gas we sell in the country, we can
Yeah.
add maybe 5 cents there to be able to pay back this loan. So that is
Gabriel,
a good
just hold
investment.
your thought because you mentioned toll.
You're
The
right.
day I win the lottery, I want to build a highway from Cape Palmas to Cape
Yeah.
Mount, and I
Yeah.
put the toll on it and collect toll on that road for the next 100 years. How about that?
That would be a great investment. Matter of fact, I told you that I drove by road from Carware to Freetown.
Yeah.
There is a toll that I think there is one toll there. Yeah, I think there's one toll there, right? You can do that. That would be a great public-private partnership. You can do that. Tell the government I'm going to do this for such and such amount, but in returns, this is what I'm going to do. A contract that will allow me to collect such and such amount for every vehicle that passed in that toll for 100 years. And you're going to like if you know how to collect that toll money efficiently, you're going to double your money maybe within maybe 5 or 10 years. And if you go
Mm.
100 years, that's a great investment. But
Right.
that from a well, if you want to look at it from a good debt standpoint, that's how we that's what I call good debt. Money that you spend right now to yield something better in the future. Like what we call in business, we call it research and development, right?
Yeah.
So let me say this and then I'll land. In company that are just starting out, you don't see if you look on their balance sheet, there's so much debt. The reason being that because they're investing it right now, and within the next 3, 4, 5 years, that investment will start paying off and they will start yielding a lot of returns. So that's what good debt does from a borrowing standpoint, right? Hopefully, I was able to answer that question.
Yes, yes,
All right.
yes. Because that's what we're going to get. Oh, everybody has that. So now I'm saying, the areas in which when a government is sure when a word that we use to say if you get a country at heart.
Mm-hmm,
So if a government does not have the country at heart, you can do all these things, right?
mm-hmm.
So you take debt. So you
Right.
take debt,
Mm-hmm.
and it is not good debt because you use that debt to travel
Yeah.
or to pay salaries.
Mm-hmm,
So you are not investing in anything. So
mm-hmm.
that money is not going to. We got to go dig in our pockets again to pay it back.
Yes,
So I
exactly.
see. So I see. That's what these politicians are doing. So if
And
I have go ahead, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead. Land your question. I think.
Right, no, go ahead. I always have good questions, so I'll bring one after you.
Great. So yeah, exactly. And that has been, and to be fair, this I don't want to just be beating up this administration. That has been our case from the previous administration, right? Even though their level of borrowing wasn't too much because the alien administration, she had the international people in her pocket. She could bring foreign direct investment in, so she didn't need to borrow too much. But in this administration, there is no connection whatsoever. You either go to the World Bank or the IMF, who don't just give you chump change, 30 million
How
here,
about
this and
Dubai?
that never materialized. As I said, you got to be able to have some level of influence to go outside of the IMF and bring enough money in, right? So it's not just this administration. The same thing we did it in the previous administration, with the level you know of debt we were able to erase. If we were able to pack on that much debt, maybe even half of it, another 2 billion, but use that $2 billion to just build our maybe infrastructure, a majority part of our infrastructure. By now, the rest of the country, we won't be too cluttered in Monrovia there where everybody know each other and everybody in each other's business. People would have been comfortable living in Bapulu, in these other places, and just have direct access to this place because you have a freeway. I can just drive maybe an hour from there, come right into Monrovia, or uh, the economy will be moving in those places because people are now moving there. Where people go, that's where economic activity flow. So it would have helped us in a way, but that was done with the previous administration, and this current administration, is being done on a very excessive level. So we want to beat them down because they don't have any. Their hands are tied. Their hands are tied. So the only way they can do is just continue to borrow. And at the end of it, every one of us have to bear the brunt of that debt that we're carrying. Somebody got to pay for it, whether you or
Right.
your kids or our grandkids will have to pay for it. Yeah.
So if I ask a presidential aspirant, how do you intend to service our debt, or how do you intend to pay for our debt, or how do you intend to bring down our debt to GDP ratio? That going rate?
Who who's giving you those questions? I think let me not say who's giving you those questions. Great that is a great question. And I think for me, um somebody with a finance and economic background, that's one of the biggest questions that I always have, because one way or another, just how the former president Ellen was able to wipe out our debt, we don't have that option anymore. So we're gonna have to confront it. Now, your question is, how do we service this debt? So right now we are paying $100 million on debt servicing. 100 million. That is 16% of our budget on debt servicing. meaning that every month, you know how you pay your credit card?
Right.
Every revenue every paycheck you get, 16% of it has to go towards credit card payment. Or in our case, for every the budget we get, 16% or 100 million is, I think it's 99 point something. So I rounded up to 100 million goes towards debt servicing. Now you can, from if you want to do quick math, I know you're good at math. You can determine to determine the average interest rate on that debt, right? Now,
Yeah.
as a presidential aspirant, the question that you should be asking is, what who do we owe, right? One. Second, what are the structure of this debt of
Yeah.
each person, right? The structure could be, hey, are we giving up something? Are we giving up concession? Um, is this debt, what are also the interest rate on that? What did we pony up? In a case, what collateral did we give? What did we pony up to take on this money, right? So if I were a presidential aspirant, the first thing I would go look at is the debt, the structure. The structure
Mm.
meaning, how do we negotiate? What clauses are in there? What can I bargain with?
Right.
Um, what are the grace period, right? Now, if you know all of that, you can now have a plan put together to say, once I assume power at such and such and such time, these are the debt that I want to deal with. This debt, maybe I have good interest rate on it. I can leave it as it is. But this one, the interest rate on it is high, or there's too much clauses in this one that I need to adjust. That will give you the reason why the tools that you need to bargain, to negotiate, to go back to the drawing board, right? Now, in our case, let's say if there were high interest rate, you can go back and now say, okay, I want to restructure it, right? Um, I, the interest rate maybe is at 7% right now. I want to restructure it to be, maybe 5% or maybe 4%. Such and these are the reason why we're coming into a country, we're inheriting an economy that isn't functioning. I need some of that money to be able to invest in other things. So this is the reason why I need to restructure it. It's all about conversation. But before you begin that conversation, you want to know what your debt is. You want to know who you owe. You want to know what those, what we call agreements, were, how they were
Mm.
drafted. As we
Yeah.
always, as a good lawyer will always tell you, the contract favors the writer. Who writes the contract, they will put things in it that favor them. If you're not at that table, that means you're pretty much being taken apart. Yeah.
Wow. I love this. I'm having a second thought now whether I should go back to school for finance. Well, and my last question is, anything else you want to talk about on this budget shortfalls and how we prevent that?
I think the way to prevent a budget shortfall is, for me, I think, as I said, a budget is always an estimate, right? Um, and I think the reason why, let me first tell you the reason why we always over project. The reason why we over project is we look at the number that the growth perspective that the IMF puts out. Say Liberia is going to grow the economy by such and such time, and we get too excited, we get carried away. So we go on this elaborate projection and project this huge uh, amount of money envelope that we think we're going to make. That's one, right? The way to prevent it, as I said earlier, one, understand your guarantee sources of taxes, like how much you have coming in. What, even if you were to just sit there without doing anything, this is guarantees how much I'm going to make. One, guarantee how much royalties I'm getting, right? And it's a little complex. So the royalty from the natural resources are determined on the volatility on the commodity, whether it's gold or diamond or iron ore, right? Now, the to be able to be able to know exactly what's going to come in, you got to monitor the volatility of those commodity on the market. Know what gold is trading at within this period. You can average it out. Say, I know the gold is trading at such and such. If nothing else changes, it's going to stay at this level for this amount. So if I have concession that involve golds, I know at least I'm going to. You can go at the lower end to say at least I can expect this amount every month from the royalty company, right? It comes with good assessment, good good understanding of
Right.
your revenues and the revenue basis, but also be realistic in terms of the growth prospect.
Yeah.
Understand, don't just go by what the IMF and the World Bank puts out. Those are just
Right.
prospect projections, right? It meaning that there's potential if you do the right thing. But if you don't do the right thing, and because it said you have these prospects, but you don't do the right thing and you expect the right things to happen to you, that's why
Right.
you will end up getting a budget shuffle and end up doing a recast. And I think that's the biggest mistake we always make. We look at the projection prospect that IMF puts out, and we said because of that prospect, we're going to make such and such money. That's why we always have this shuffle. I mean, you can throw in
Yeah.
corruption there too and other things, but I think
Yeah.
those are the biggest ones.
Right. And corruption happened because of these reasons that we just stated. If you don't
Yeah.
know what you're doing, you and you think corruption is it. But the story is told of two guys, right? So these two guys, they were brothers. One
Hmm.
was told that you will be rich.
Hmm.
The other said, my man, you'll be poor. So
Hmm.
the guy who was told that he will be poor, he said, well, I mean, what can I do?
Hmm.
So every day he's on the farm.
Hmm.
He's working and say, let me just eat because I know I'm going to be poor all my life.
Right.
So just make my farm be eating. The guy who was told that he was going to be rich,
Hmm.
he dressed up in his white shirt, and you go to bed, you sit down in front of your house all day and say, I'm going to be rich. In the
Hmm.
evening, he goes to bed. 10 years later, the guy who was told he was going to be poor had a
On the farm.
farm
Yeah.
that was so many acres, bigger than Firestone acre, and he
He's
became
doing
wealthy
well.
rich.
Yeah.
This guy who was told that he was going to be rich became very poor because he sat down.
Yeah. There you go.
He listened to IMF and World Bank, and
Yeah.
it didn't work.
Yeah. That's a very good analogy, and I think that's the way we behave. That's the way we behave. Well, at least our leaders from a projection standpoint, and we throwing. This is why when they throw out this revenue, when it came out, people say, "Oh, they're projecting this is the biggest revenue the country has ever made." Anybody? I see people getting excited all everywhere. I say, "Yo, calm down."
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I think we said it on the show before. There's going to be a recast of the budget, believe it or not. You can't just have a projection and go off a projection and not like you said. You just because you're being told that you're being rich, you just fold your hand and expect
yeah.
manas to fall from heaven.
No, it
Yeah,
doesn't happen. Let me read a few comments here. A lot of these
yeah.
comments come from our friend here, Admet. He said, the
Mhm,
longer the inflation, the higher the exchange rate. Central banks seek central banks seek to increase the interest rate to lower inflation. He defined budget shortfall. He said basically collect less taxes than projected. When the government budget based on projected future revenue but end up collecting less taxes to meet up with the budget projection, and
mhm.
sometimes too you spend more. He defines revenue, grants, and loan make up the budget. He said budget is based on revenue, grants, and loan. Emmanuel Jackson, the increasing exchange rate and budget shortfalls in Liberia are largely due to USD capital flight out of the Liberian economy. The two-tier currency creates hyperinflation. Uh, Higher budgets give government the latitude to put more money into the economy, thereby creating jobs and increase in business in the country. Uh, Emmanuel said, Manager, in the case of Liberia, not all revenues collected are cashed into the budget, diverting revenue, loans, and in most cases, grants for non functioning government programs.
That's a good point.
Right? Admin also said, if the GDP is 3.5 and the debt is 1.2, the debt to GDP ratio is 34%. Doing some
Is that
math.
what? Is that 1.2? We're at 2.1 billion.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
2
yeah,
point.
yeah. 2.1 billion, Ahmed.
All right. So those are the few comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think I responded to. So, Ahmed, the debt right now is stand at 2.1, now 1.2 billion. As I said, you go on the Ministry of Finance website. There's a special report on debt. I think it's on their debt management team. It's about 30, sometimes 35 pages long. We're staying at 1.2, 2.1 billion right now. Maybe I misspoke and said 1.2 billion, but it's 2.1 billion. So that number I think is about 60%, not
Oh,
even.
oh, yeah, yeah. I think
Right.
you misspoke. You said 1.2, so it's
Yeah,
2.1.
yeah. So it's 2.1. Sorry if I misspoke.
Right.
Um, and let me see his other comment here on the if government collect. Uh, he said, okay, so this one where he said, when the government budget base the gov the when the government budget based on projections future revenue, but end up collecting less taxes to meet up with the. That's not the comment I wanted to look at. There was a comment here. He talks about voila. Um, yeah, I don't know if I can even find a comment. Um, okay, voila. So he said, maybe this is the comment that I wanted to respond to. He said, higher budget gives government the latitude to put more money into the economy, thereby creating jobs and increase in businesses and the country. I do agree with you, Ahmed, and that's theoretically that's what's supposed to be the case. This is why, this is why I don't fault people who celebrate when the government, pronounce that they're going to have higher uh budget uh you know every time they put out the budget. This is why I don't, because this is from a theoretical standpoint, this is what they expect, that more money, meaning the government will invest in the economy, and they're going to create jobs. But in our case, that's never the case. We always go back to this recast budget, like mid-year. Every year we put out a budget. By mid-year, we're talking about recasting the budget, and that's because of, again, the priorities. And if you look at the budget, how we structure, majority of it is spent on reoccurring expenditure. So there's not really much to deploy back in the economy. So that's the problem we have. So yeah, but thank you for that comment.
Thank you,
Um,
and thank you, Gabriel. And
yeah,
then let's conclude. Thank you so much. I think this was a good discussion. I learned a lot, and I hope our audience and even those who will watch later also learn from this.
yeah,
Always focus on Libra is where you should be.
yeah.
Your
Yeah,
closing.
and thank you for for joining us on here. So every now and then you come and pop in and and leave, but it's good having you here. As I said, sometimes you like the question that you asked today were great questions, very tough questions. And you know always, the tougher the question, the more insights it give you in terms of digging deeper into your understanding of that topic, and you do a good job in asking great questions. So as you said, hopefully everyone was able to learn from what we talked about today. As I said earlier, this is somebody, I heard this from someone, the as you teach, you also learn. So as we talk
Yeah.
about these things, we also learn from you guys as well. But in the process, I think everyone is, hoping that everyone is learning from what we do on here. And I think before we came on the show, is that, what we do on here is not just because there's a campaign coming up, or, such and such. It's something that is a library, online library, that you'll be able to go to
Yeah.
say, if I want to go to learn something about exchange rate, as it relate to Liberia context, you can come on here and listen to that. You can also, you probably stumble upon this video, and it will make sense a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now. It's because the stuff are relevant. They will always be relevant. So that's the beauty of doing this thing. But it was a pleasure talking about this. I also learned as well. So um, and hopefully you learn, and we look forward to having you here next Saturday. Yeah.
Always focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We want to
Yeah.
say thank you again, Gabriel, and the entire FOL Marketplace team.
Yeah.
Thanks to our viewers, those who watch today and those who will watch later. Until we catch you again, we're going to play our song that says, "We are all Liberians." Have a good night, and God bless you.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home. I'll be right